Good afternoon and welcome to Agent Armour Accounts and Tower House Wealth Management review of the autumn budget. This being the first Labour budget, it's certainly going to be an interesting one. I know we've heard quite a few grumbles already from our end, and SAU have as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, admittedly, it probably wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it's certainly not brilliant, really, is it? So
I think when your client base is businesses and business owners, I think we said before we started filming that when you look at some of the statistics, whilst it's only affecting a relatively small percentage of the overall population, when you're an accountant or a financial advisor, it's a very high proportion of your client base. So I think we're probably going to get a disproportionate number of moans and groans. And considering that, I think if you look at all the sort of breakdown post budget, and it really was. It's a budget that businesses are going to bear the cost of in varying different ways, and that is our market, isn't it? So I think certainly a few phone calls and emails already, and more to come, no doubt.
Yeah, it comes sort of 2:30 in the afternoon. We're getting a lot of text messages through saying, what's happening here? What's this and all that sort of stuff. It's again we certainly SM, because obviously we focus a lot on the SME and owner managed business market and stuff like that. Is whether the government want to see it or not, that market is effectively pretty much the backbone of Britain. You've got a lot of the guys here who are the main GDP for Britain itself. So whether they be farmers, whether they be workers or consultants and stuff like that, they're the guys that employ people. They are the guys that bring the money in. They are the guys that actually contribute to this country a lot. I know they have employees that help as well. And again, this is what we were kind of expecting with the Labour budget, was that they are very much for the employee and the unions. Where obviously the Tory government seemed to be not going too political, more for business and entrepreneurship as well. They've gone down the track of they're not affecting the working man, but again, they don't seem to include the owners of businesses into that as well, because a lot of those guys are the working man as well. And again, there's sort of looking at the changes to the employers' national insurance. We ran some sort of figures last night based on sort of changes based on if you were paid the minimum wage this year as it would be next year, and then also sort of number of employees, so anywhere from one employee all the way up to 22 employees. Between sort of 3 to 6 employees, yes, you'll be better off. But once you go over that 6 employees on 37.5 hours a week on the new minimum wage for the 21 plus, you're actually going to start being worse off to the point when you hit 22 employees, you're almost £12,000 worse off, because you just there's not those breaks there anymore. Again, it's huge.
I think one positive within there is that as we were saying before we started this has been a budget of speculation, and I don't think I've ever heard more rumour coming into a budget. I think it'd probably be useful to look at some of the things that didn't change, and namely one for us from our perspective was the rumour about getting employer NI onto employer pension contributions, which that would have raised to the tune of £20 billion. We're really pleased they've not gone down that route. One, because it would be, I think it'd be ludicrously complicated to administer, and I think it would require a lot of change in the tax system. And I also think they've not gone down. I think there's a vein through the whole of this budget about the NHS, and I think they've looked at doctors, GPs, nurses, anyone who's sort of anyone who's higher rate tax in the NHS. I think they've looked at how would this budget impact them, and they've tried to avoid anything that would be too onerous, which we'll come on to in a minute. But the changes to sort of IHT and pensions and things like that, reasonably speaking, doesn't really impact the NHS.
No.
So employer pension contributions didn't receive NI, so that was good news. Tax-free cash on pensions, that stayed at just under £270,000. which is the lump sum allowance, as it's now referred to. That's what we've had since April this year. So for anyone who's not come across that before, the maximum lump sum you can have from a pension tax-free is £268,000. And obviously there's huge amount of speculation, numbers between 100 and 150,000 being noted as a potential cap. Again, I partially wonder whether the decision here was because of the NHS pension scheme. I sort of said to my clients in the run up to this that if you've been in a public sector and part of your employment contract gave you a right to build up a tax-free lump sum, are you veering into employment law by changing those rules? So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's something that won't change in the future, but I don't think there would have been a position to change it quickly. I think it would have been administratively heavy.
So
I think a lot of work to do it. So that's sort of two things that were dodged on pensions, and the allowance has remained at £60,000 a year. I would, if I was a betting man, I would have thought it would have gone back to 40,000. It's a very easy change to make. To be honest, all round, I can't actually quite work out why they haven't, because it would have been a way to raise tax. Again, maybe part of the, if you go back a couple of years, you're having GPs with huge tax bills because of over contributions to pensions, whether there's an element of protecting them within this. But needless to say, that's still a brilliant allowance, and it's great for businesses, great for individuals. And lastly, on the pension funds, they didn't change tax relief. So Rachel Reeves was the lady that spoke about introducing a single rate. 33% was what got rumoured as a flat rate of tax relief. So at the minute, obviously, as we well know, you get tax relief at your highest marginal rate up to 45%. So a cap there would have been bad for higher earners. Again, I do wonder whether it's the NHS that saved that a little bit, but so they've not gone down that route. So a bit like yourself, I think it could have been a worse budget. There's some big elements, and I would probably say the three biggest: APR, BPR, and IHT on pensions, and we'll go into each of those in turn. They for me were the after NI were the key takeaways. But considering the list of what could have happened, it's still quite long. At least it allows us some certainty now to plan for clients moving forward, and no doubt, whilst people might not be happy with the changes, there's a little bit of relief there for people.
It could have been a lot worse than it has been. I think that's the offshoot from this. They could have gone after salary sacrifice pensions. If they did, then that would have then affected the NHS pension schemes, which then would have affected the doctors, the nurses, which were what they were trying to sort of tout themselves as being supportive of, obviously negotiating the new pay increase deal and stuff like that. And then if they turned around and said, right, well, we're going to remove your salary sacrifice allowances for your pensions, it would have been political suicide, really, wouldn't it? They would have been in complete and utter turmoil because they would have been seen of giving one hand and taking away with the other, especially with NHS pensions. I think they get the employer's contributions 14.38%, if I remember correctly. So they are quite a nice pension contribution to go into, and again, if they did start attacking those, it would be political suicide, really. They certainly wouldn't have got in for another term. They'd probably even struggle to carry on this term if they'd done that. So
is there anything sort of from your side of the table that you've had questions about, rumours or anything that you might have been expecting to see that didn't come through in this budget?
So we've got I think the main one was the salary sacrifice for pensions. A lot of our guys were quite worried about that. And also as well, the business asset relief as well. I think, again, they've kept it at £1 million lifetime allowance. Although they have looked at, they are increasing the capital gains rates on amounts above that. It could have been a lot worse, because one of the rumours we heard was that she was going to cancel it completely.
Totally removed.
And that would have then pushed a lot of guys straight into, and it would have effectively put the country into free fall as to why am I even bothering investing in this business.
Well, they always called it entrepreneurs relief for a reason, didn't we?
And it just didn't seem. I know we were going from 10 to 14 to 18% in time. It's still not brilliant.
It's getting on for double.
It's
getting on for doubling in 2 years, doubling the rate of capital gains tax that a business owner is going to pay on their shares.
And again, you look at it thinking, well, why not take it out as salary and stuff like that? But I know you.
It's definitely it's going to change the way that you plan for an exit.
Yeah,
I think that's the key, and I think, whether part of that is taking advantage more, as businesses are growing, starting to take capital out as pension contributions as you're going along, versus, I suppose, selling a business has always been jam tomorrow. It's your reward is at the very end, and I think it's probably going to change how businesses look at remunerating themselves. The difficulty is obviously if you do have a successful business, which ultimately is what you should want to strive for. Nobody starts a business not to be successful and not to earn money. I think if you've got a successful business, and if you've got a sort of typical married couple setup, husband and wife setup, something like that, and you're already drawing out dividends at higher rate, it is going to make that side more challenging as to how you remunerate yourself. I mean, we've always said in an ideal world, you have low salary, £10,000-12,000. Dividends up to £50,000 to use your whole basic rate band, very low rate of tax on dividends. But as soon as you get past that point, it starts to get unattractive, and it starts to bring in things like losing your child benefit. And obviously, we didn't see any changes there as well, which was I think Martin Lewis was really campaigning for the household view of income, not going on the highest earner, but having it sort of proportionally across the household. And we didn't see that, and I think that's a change that he was really expecting. Him. And then you're moving into 33.75% dividend tax at that point. So I've always said ideal world, you're drawing out low salary, dividends up to 50,000, fully utilising your pension contribution of 60,000 beyond. And I think for most successful businesses, that is the way to plan now, as opposed to whereas historically you might have thought, well, I'm going to leave some of maybe not go as hard with your pension. I think that is going to be the way. Because if you're sort of deferring it to take it out at 18% tax in the future, obviously that's not overly attractive. But also the fact that along the way, if you're talking say cash in the bank and you've paid successful business, you're paying 25% corporation tax. By the time you actually get that money to you, it's 18% capital gains after 25% corporation tax. So I think actually the value of leaving cash in a business now is not as much as it was.
No, I think that's what this is ultimately driving forwards, is the idea of almost spend it whilst you've got it. Again, that's without going too political. It sort of starts to sort of speak volumes of the Labour government again. I know it can be quite a tongue-in-cheek sort of political statement, but there is always that mentality of, well, spend it. It's like, well, no, we need to be able to invest and grow the company and stuff like that, and the country as a whole. But the fact that a lot of business owners and a lot of entrepreneurs aren't going to be effectively rewarded for putting in their time, their effort, their 90 to 95-hour weeks at the end of it, you start thinking, well, why? Well, I might as well just spend it, stick it into a pension, and then hopefully when I hit 55, I've still got that ability to draw out a cash-free lump sum at the end. Cause we don't know in 10, 15 years' time, it could have changed again. We just don't know, and it's I think it's that uncertainty as well. And again, it's just, I know they can't do massive sweeping changes, but the ones that they have done have really sort of hit quite hard, quite a few businesses as well, sort of thing. So
I think the biggest change that we've seen as a business, and I think where the questions are going to come from for us, are the changes to the IHT treatment of pensions. That was if there was a topic I'd pick to focus on in this conversation from our side of the table, and when I come into any talk, presentation, podcast, whatever it is, I always sit and think to myself, what are my clients going to ask me? What after this budget? It's understanding the change. But the next and more important bit, I think, for people is understanding, if you to take value from these conversations, it's practically what does it mean for people and what can they do. So, the change that we've seen currently, pensions are exempt from inheritance tax. So, if we just used in all these scenarios, we use the assumption that somebody's just got £1 million house, so they've already used all of their IHT free exemptions for their estate, and so whatever we're looking at now is above that. So, currently currently, or up until this budget, if you had £1 million house and then a £1 million in your pension, you'd have paid no inheritance tax. And in theory, after this budget, if you've got £1 million house and £1 million in your pension, you'll pay £400,000 in inheritance tax.
That's a huge amount of money. Suddenly just wipe off. 40% of your.
And in that situation, if you've got a £2 million estate, only £1 million of that is liquid, because £1 million of it is your house, which if you're down south is very understandable. You can't really raise an income from that. So that's £1 million maybe to give a husband and wife everything they need in retirement, which in theory is probably conservatively a £40,000 a year income. Now, £40,000 a year, when the national minimum wage is going to be the equivalent of probably getting on for £25,000 a year, £40,000 a year isn't a huge amount of money. And obviously the risk of that being taxed on death. Now, some of the details that were there, if you leave your pension to a married spouse, then there won't be any inheritance tax, so much like other assets at the moment. So that's good, that's sensible. It obviously brings in the very romantic question that if you're not married, it is genuinely worth considering getting married for tax purposes. And there's a lot of reasons, inheritance tax plan as a general rule, one of the top things at the list is being married. They don't recognise a common law couple. And that will be the same for pensions, it stands at the moment. And we assume that would extend to, civil partnerships as well. But it won't extend to unmarried couples. So that's one point to take away. So really kind of looking at second death, the rules as you currently stand at the moment, and this is where for me, there needs to be some clarity. So some key things, a consultation started immediately. It's going to run until January 2025 to look at the proposed changes. And I think there's going to be one point that comes out ahead of absolutely everything else. And that's at the moment, if you die post age 75, so we use that same scenario again, £1 million pension, your pension becomes subject to income tax post 75 on death. So if I've got £1 million pension, I leave it to my son, he would effectively pay probably the best part of £450,000 tax if he took it as a lump sum. So actually, death post 75 potentially isn't that much of a substantial change, as long as we see these double taxation rules come in, which basically means that if you do die post 75, that if you've paid 40% inheritance tax on your pot, so in this scenario £400,000, that on the remainder you're not then subject to income tax as well, because theoretically you could end up in a situation where you're paying 85% tax, and actually the clarity wasn't there in that budget. I've seen two different articles with two different outcomes. I think the government are well aware, they've had immediate feedback on it, and I assume, I can't see in any world that they won't come out and say, if you pay IHT, you don't then pay income tax. And I think that the system, how they want that to be collected, is that your pension provider will deduct IHT off the pot. So you die at 76 years old, £1 million pension, your pension provider takes £400,000, and they send your beneficiary £600,000. Obviously, they'll have to, there's a bit of work there to liaise, is it going to a spouse or not? But as long as those rules come into play, then in theory, the overall tax position for post 75 isn't as horrific as it first seems. Under 75 though would be, because currently if you die under 75 it's both income tax free and inheritance tax free, and all that would happen is whilst it would remain income tax free, it would be subject to inheritance tax. So £1 million pension, you die at 74 years old, you lose £400,000 in tax. Say you're leaving it to a son or a daughter or something like that, and actually there's very little that can be done in that situation to mitigate the impact of that tax. Now, none of this is due to come in until 2027. The consultation will take place.
It'll be several months before we actually get a result from that as well.
There's some bits to iron out. I think the next natural thing that people will be asking is, how does it change planning? What can you do? Because it is substantial. This is the biggest change we've seen for years. I think the one thing that jumped out at me, and I had a long drive back yesterday in the car kind of mulling this over, and the first thing that came out to me was, if you're post 75 and you've not taken tax-free cash from your pension, actually, if you have got an estate that's subject to inheritance tax, the consideration to draw your tax-free lump sum and gift it and hope that you survive the 7 years, you're facing a scenario there that if you don't take it and gift it, you're going to pay inheritance tax. Whereas if you take it and gift it, you might not, as long as it's 5
yeah,
so if you've got £1 million pension, that's the equivalent of being able to, get £250,000 of that million outside the estate. So, which is a total U-turn on where we've been with planning. Up until this point, it's been don't touch your pension, it's sacrosanct, leave it till the end, last asset, never touch it if you've got an inheritance taxable estate. So I think that's one outcome we expect to see, but again, I won't be rushing to do this with any of my clients until it's always case by case, but certainly until the consultation has ended. And then, but I still think, practically speaking, the next question people I think are going to ask is, are pensions still worth it? And my view on this is that we've got property, ISAs, and then we've got pensions, and they've been right up here in tax efficiency. They've been leagues ahead of anything else. They're so tax advantaged, and actually all we've done is just take a bit of the shine off. And then you're still going to have pensions, still going to have property, ISAs, cash, and pensions still going to be ahead. If you're a business owner, if you're a high rate taxpayer, additional rate taxpayer, they're still going to carry all of the income tax savings, tax-free growth, capital gains tax-free growth, the ability to take corporation tax deductible contributions, all of those bits are still there, and 25% tax-free cash. We've just lost inheritance. So in terms of it being an inheritance tax planning vehicle, I think it's going to take the shine off, but actually I still think as a planning vehicle, whilst people are going to be miffed, so to speak, because we never like to lose anything, it is still going to be the best option.
It's still going to be there. I mean, again, also touching on ISAs as well, there's no change to that. You've still got the 20,000.
Still good limits, other than the British ISA, which never even got off the ground. That's a small nod to the British ISA that basically has been totally scrapped because
completely mothballed.
It goes against the reason they scrapped it though, and it does make sense. It goes against the idea of ISA simplification, bringing in another allowance that's specifically for one thing. When we're trying to, everything that's been done over the last couple of years has been to simplify ISAs. These rules about not being able to have more than one ISA in a tax year, and now it's very flexible. You can open as many as you want as long as you don't exceed the £20,000. We've obviously got normal adult ISAs, junior ISAs, and then we've got lifetime ISAs. I think that is enough ISAs. We don't need an Argos catalogue of ISAs.
You don't be sitting there 20 minutes thinking, which ISAs works well for me, and it's.
So that is off the cards. It won't. Consultation. Some of the big players came out and just said they thought it was basically a pointless endeavour. And I'd probably have to say I thought the same thing. And in reality, if you look at where people have invested, predominantly, or where asset allocation tends to be now, it is more worldwide. It is more global. So forcing people to invest into the UK, which has been. In terms of fund manager and asset allocation, the UK has been probably a smaller proportion. I at the same point whenever I have a conversation with a new client, that when you're looking at investing, you talk about risk, and you're looking at global equity markets. You've got Apple, which is larger than the entire UK economy. So if you add up all the companies, all the value that's out there, we are smaller. The whole UK economy is smaller than Apple. So it is obviously logical now to have, you do see exposures overseas over exposure to the UK. So I don't think it really had any legs, to be honest.
No, it was all more of a flash in the pan, really, wasn't it? I think again, it
sounded good.
It
sounded brilliant, but it didn't really do that.
But it just fell flat on its face again, unfortunately. So it's just we again, it just seems to be that we're in a position at the moment, obviously with this budget, where again I know before the budget harping on, for want of a better term, about the black hole in the budget. There's not really a black hole. There is a difference between how much you're collecting and how much you're spending. And again, obviously, they had the idea that they want to spend X number of billions. They've got to get X number of billions back in. And the very much the argument of, it's left in a much worse state than we thought it was. Well, again, you've had access to the same sort of figures that the previous government had as well. So it's at times you start to feel like that they are. Yes, we've got a long way. We've got an economy to rebuild and to sort of come out of COVID and out of Brexit as well. And there are ways and means of trying to sort of do that without effectively stifling growth as well. I mean, I think, again, I know with the IHT for pensions coming in, it's it will bring in quite a few £billion to the exchequer.
It's relatively small,
Yeah,
though, isn't it?
It's very
when you talk headlines, the headline was £40 billion of tax needed to be raised. Now, 25 million of that is going to be NIs. The lion's share of this whole budget is NI, and actually the other taxes, I think it's sort of tinkering. And again, my only political statement, I'll make in this is that they've painted themselves into a corner, and I think anyone you speak to has the same opinion, because they said they wouldn't raise taxes on the working man, and that's this budget is it's I think people in our position working with companies would say that this will raise taxes for the working man, because if companies pay more NI, that will mean that they'll probably give lower pay rises to staff, or they may consider letting somebody go, one way or another. They'll have to balance the books, and the person who suffers at the end of it is the employee. So I'm not sure that statement works, but the headline was, we're not going to raise employee NI, and we're not going to raise VAT and income tax. And the problem is they're your biggest tax generators. So then we're having to look at more obscure legislation, which it hits pockets of society. And obviously, the point that I wanted to raise and get your thoughts on, because it's no doubt going to be a question for your clients, is APR and BPR, and obviously it might be worth giving a basic description for our viewers as to what they are and what's changing.
Obviously talking about APR and BPR, so agricultural property relief and business property relief. Obviously the government's looking at reforming the inheritance tax reliefs from the 6th of April 2026, in which there were originally nil rate bands and the exemptions for that. Now they're capping it at £1 million, or the first £1 million of that property. So if you had a property on agricultural land, you get £1 million worth of that free, and then after that you're looking at 20% IST, aren't you? So it's huge. It's going to affect certainly a lot of farm landowners and farmers. It's massive, because farmers, they are asset rich, but 95% of them are cash poor. They are, all of their assets, or most of their assets, are sat in their land, and therefore this sort of measure is effectively going to force them to have to look at selling their farmlands and sell up their land. And again, when you're looking at selling off agricultural land, yes, it's agricultural land, but 9 times out of 10, it's worth more value as development property land and stuff like that. So we could be facing the risk of really sort of losing our farming agricultural side of the UK, which again is a huge sector, certainly in Lincolnshire as well.
So I think it's very relevant to where we are, and I think as well hopefully there's this time for these rules is 2026, I think, for these rules to come into play. So there is time for consultation to take place and for feedback to be given. I think from the numbers that I've seen, the risk is when you compare business property relief to agricultural property relief, so specifically looking at farming, there's a lot more claims at lower values of farming estates than there is when you look at business estates. So I think, I haven't got the numbers to hand, but percentage wise, they're trying to target bigger companies with business property relief, whereas with agricultural property relief, it's going to capture small farms. Again, you can have a reasonably small Lincolnshire farm of 200 acres that's worth £2 million, and they're not huge, they're not good investments. They're not, I think plenty of us have watched Clarkson's Farm and things like that, and you see the profits that these places actually make. It's a bit of a labour of love. Yes, there's value in the land, but nobody ever particularly realises that value. It's so if it's people aren't. I think the issue is farmers aren't benefiting generationally. If a farmer dies and leaves the land to their beneficiaries who continue to farm that land, then those people aren't suddenly getting £2 million in the bank overnight to go and spend. They're getting £2 million worth of land that they've either got to sell or farm. And if you want to keep a farm going, you've got to farm the land, and the yields and income from farming isn't good. I've got to say, it's one area of the budget that I just don't understand.
Yeah.
And actually coming back to this comparison of sort of niche focused taxes versus, would it not have been fairer to raise income tax by 0.5% for everybody instead of clobbering British farming and as one very, very small sector of society? So and equally on the business asset side, in theory, you take a business that somebody's taken a modest income from the whole life, they've built up the jam tomorrow idea of selling the business, and or a family. I suppose the family business is the biggest risk. You're trying to pass a £2 million business down the generations. You die with, and again, this is the difficult. We talk about anything where it's valued more as a goodwill business, accountancy, things like that, where you've not got assets, you've not got premises. What you have is a business. Have a recurring fee book, something like that. But if you die, leave the shares of that business to your, one of your sons, how do they realise the value of that business without selling it to pay the tax man? So in that situation, if you've got a £2 million business value, a £2 million accountancy practice, you're going to be left with a bill of £200,000, which somebody, in that situation, your son's going to have to find £200,000 to pay the bill if he wants to keep that business together and keep running it. And equally, it's not easy to, that it also revolves around liquidity, because if someone dies, it's not necessarily that quick to sell a business. So practically, to me, it's very messy. It targets, it's not, it sort of goes against entrepreneurs, it goes against British farming, and obviously, I know farmers are up in arms at the minute because they got the promise that British farming was going to be backed in this budget, and I don't think they feel like that's been delivered on. Certainly from the couple of quick interactions I've had with agricultural clients, they are not happy. But again, there's a bit of time till this comes in. Let's sort of see where they go. Practically speaking, I've not heard anyone bringing any particular solutions to the table at the moment, but no doubt, taking advice is going to be more important than ever, especially when you're looking at either inheritance tax planning or sale of businesses. So, interestingly for our sector, the one that knocks on to is AIM shares. So again, for people watching who've not come across AIM shares before, investments into AIM shares qualify for business property relief. So it's effectively a way where if you don't have shares in a family business, but you want to buy shares in a small company to get inheritance tax savings, normally you can go to an AIM listed company. You can buy shares often through professional fund management. I think the biggest AIM listed investment out there is someone like Octopus, who've huge player. I think their AIM exposure is probably £1.5+ billion. So and I know there's been a lot of nervousness in the marketplace in the run up to this budget. If you go out and put £100,000 into AIM shares, after 2 years of holding those shares, you'd have got full inheritance tax exemption. So on a £100,000 investment, you'd save £40,000 inheritance tax. But it's always worked on the proviso that you're investing into small, illiquid, high-risk companies. So there's always been a fair match. When we talk to clients, it's not a giveaway. And often there's not a lot. There's not a lot of growth. It's not like going out and investing into something where you've got some choice over where your funds invested. They're very specialist investments. But under these new rules, AIM will be affected. So instead of that scenario where £100,000 would have raised £40,000 inheritance tax saving, it will now only raise £20,000 inheritance tax saving. So I think the question from clients is going to be, and certainly my question would be to an advisor, is this the right solution for me anymore? Is if I'm invested in this solely for inheritance tax benefits, and I'm going to lose half of those benefits.
Why?
What is it still worth it? Is taking that high level of risk, still worth it? And I think what clients are going to want to see, and I think how the market's going to have to change, there's going to have to be better prospects for growth in AIM investments. At the minute, I think someone would be really happy if you invested £100,000. You die 3 years later, and your £100,000 hasn't grown by a penny, but you save 40% tax. That's the return. Whereas now, I think people are going to want to see a little bit more from that. So they're impacted, and whilst, from my understanding, from what I've read, whilst obviously you've got a £1 million threshold as a farm or a family business before you start this treatment, with AIM, it will be from day one. So there is no £1 million threshold. I think if you invest into an AIM portfolio, there's no limit for you. You'll be immediately impacted. The AIM market, interestingly, yesterday rose by 4% in one day because actually they'd been living in fear up until this point that they were going to totally remove the exemption. So again, I don't like to be doom and gloom. It's not my personality. So taking it, looking at the positive there is that actually for the AIM market, it's not as bad as it could have been. Whilst it's not great, and it's definitely a raised question, and it's a change for AIM-specific investments, the outcome could have been worse. Yeah,
could have been a lot worse. It's nice to see certain reliefs are. We're still, again, going back to our initial intro, it could have been a lot worse than what the budget has been, sort of thing. It's not ideal, but with all the rumour mill that was coming up beforehand and everything like that, it's a lot better than what we thought it was going to be. I think is probably the upshoot of this. It's trying to find those positives in a difficult period, I think, is probably the best way of looking at it. So,
if I look at again, try to look at a slightly more positive lens, we've touched on capital gains tax. So, I think we've touched on an element of capital gains tax, but the main rates are obviously changing. So the lower rate of capital gains tax is going to 18%. The higher rate of capital gains tax is going to 24%, and that's from 10% and 18% as they currently sit. So that's a rise in capital gains tax. Again, that's not good for business. But it's also something we've got to be aware of when we're planning with clients, because that means now more than ever that unwrapped investments, so direct shareholdings, general investment accounts, anything like that that's not got some sort of tax wrap around it, like an ISA, like an investment bond, like a pension, anything that's not got one of those sort of tax shelters, it's now more than ever, if you're in that position, to look at how you're holding those investments and consider your planning. The CGT again has ended up being, the rumour I saw pre-budget was potentially seeing capital gains tax aligned with income tax rates, which would have been horrifying. Then I saw it could go to 39%, which would have been horrifying. And in reality, what we've done is aligned property's been on these high rates already. Property has already been on 18, and it was 18 and 28, and then it became 18 and 24, and now we've brought everything else in line with that. And I think really, the sector, certainly if you take advice, I'd like to think that most clients don't have unwrapped investments. They'd be using ISA allowances, etc. I think the area of the marketplace that really hits is the sale of business shares. But it's not good for business. It's not as bad as it could have been. But it's certainly somewhere else. And again, that's probably the second biggest area that's going to raise taxes after employers. To me, I think it was employers NI was the lion's share, then capital gains tax, and then after that it's these sort of other little niche areas that pick up the rest of it. But really, employer NI is the biggie, and that's going to have an impact onto the workforce. Yeah,
certainly. You've got anyone with more than sort of 6 or 7 employees are really going to start to feel that pinch. It's going to get to the point where the employers will start to think, well, okay, we've got to put people's wages up on minimum wage, but again, do we look at doing a pay rise for the guys that are above minimum wage this year, or do we look at delaying it another year? Because again, we've got to fund that NMW increase, but then also we've got to fund this employers NI cost as well, which is huge, really. No other way of looking at it. It's quite a large chunk, even though they increased the employment allowance, and also they removed the cap off that as well, because there was a cap where if you had over a certain level of employers NIC the previous year, you weren't allowed the employment allowance. They've removed that, but even then, you are still going to be paying a lot more employers' national insurance over the tax year. So and again, I know we sort of touched on asset relief and stuff like that. We've got it's good to see that they're keeping the sort of the business asset relief at £1 million. There were talks of them actually scrapping that or even halving that as well. But the slow increase from 10% to 14 to then 18 in sort of 2 years' time as well is another sort of worrying one to be aware of as well. We've got it with that sort of change ahead of us. We might start to see some more business owners bringing forwards their disposal of assets. Again, we've got sort of November, December, January, February, March, sort of 5 months, possibly 6 months before the end of the tax year to try and get this through, sort of sale of assets and stuff like that. So I think where we've got clients we're looking at disposing of their companies, I think they're going to probably start looking at bringing that forward to try and get that 10% cost through. Because a 4% change is quite a large jump.
I think the rumour or some of the finer detail, I think they're actually looking at anti-forestalling measures for agricultural property and business property.
Yeah.
So I think there might be some potential actually that because those CGT changes took effect. I mean, I think those things are in the future, but I think the ones that took effect overnight were CGT and stamp duty, because that's another one we've probably not touched on. And to be fair, stamp duty for me, I think it's probably relevant to my side of the table, in that when I look at, again, coming back to my prior comment about changes to pensions, because it's been very pension focused, it's a pensions focused budget for me. When you look at, I said to someone the other day, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. It's what's the alternative? If you're someone who's an employer who's been paying into a pension, if you look at all the other alternatives, everything else is already subject to inheritance tax. Yeah. You've also got the fact now that, to me, probably the biggest area we come up against as advisors is, I was going to say, the great British love affair with property. And don't get me wrong, property is a great diversifier. It's a good income yielding asset class. It's very location specific. I think it's specific to the individual. If you know your area, you know what to do with it, you know how to make money with property. If you run it like a business, I think it'd be great. Yeah. Is the days of the market for somebody buying 1 to 2 buy-to-lets as a strategy, sort of leaving behind? To me, if you're a high rate taxpayer, and say you're taking your average buy-to-let that may be 30% deposit, 70% borrowing, that borrowing's expensive because interest rates are still high. The fees seem to be more for buy-to-let mortgages. 5% additional stamp duty on top of your other stamp duty bands for a second property. You start to add all of these things in, mortgage interest rate relief, which we lost a few years ago. If you're a high rate taxpayer and you're starting with a yield of 6% on your buy-to-let property and you're losing 40% of that in tax with no real abilities to offset the costs of it, the net returns are getting squeezed more and more and more. And actually, when you look at it and when you speak to some clients who are investing quite heavily into property, a lot of the return long term really is going to be hinged around capital growth and not necessarily and to me, I just think this increase in stamp duty again, it's another sort of punch, another jab at second property ownership. And I just think if I was in the shoes now where I'm building my plan for the future and how I want to fund my retirement, and property it's a big question mark for me. I can't see it getting more tax efficient, and that's without considering rule changes which give tenants a lot more control and protection. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but as a landlord, I think it is a bad thing because it does sort of start to scare you away from it. We've noticed there's not enough benefits. The benefits certainly start to seem more outweighed by the issues, by the problems that you can have with the tenants. Again, quite a few of our sort of landlord clients are personal private landlords, so they're certainly feeling the squeeze with what we nickname the Osborne tax, because George Osborne that brought it in, where the cap of sort of 20% on your interest relief or finance costs for the property. And when that came in, we saw quite a large shift from... that was the biggie, wasn't it? Yeah, that was a very big one. I think a lot of people started to exit portfolios from the... If you were a portfolio landlord, and obviously my view, and so I'm not the accountant at the table, but I often say when I sit down with new clients that if property is your route forward, you need a good accountant,
Yeah.
you need to take advice, you need to consider, it's predominantly going to probably be in a limited company now as opposed to personally owned, and that means corporation tax and it means cost. It's a business. To me now, being a landlord is not a hobby thing to do.
No,
it's
not,
a business. You've got to be all in if you're going to do it. It's not something to sort of tinker with, because there's too many rules, there's too many tax changes.
And again, there's too much legislation coming now through for tenants. And again, yes, there are
a few bad landlords. A few bad landlords have ruined it for other people, and it's the same with a lot of stuff. Is that everyone gets tarred with the same brush, and people need protection, and people need a roof over their heads, and people need to know that they're safe. But equally, if you're on the other side of that and you're a landlord with a problem tenant and you're not getting paid or something, and both parties need to be mature and responsible. Unfortunately, people who've abused, turfing tenants out, which is morally totally wrong, have now meant that for people who are good landlords and who do things properly, they might end up being adversely affected by a bad tenant. So I think it's a very hands-on investment. It's something you've got to roll your sleeves up and get stuck in with. So
it's certainly not like a hobby investment. If you've got 1 or 2 properties, it's probably not worth it now, really. Whereas if you've got sort of 4 to 5, possibly even more, again, you're looking at a limited company wrapper and stuff like that, but it's a lot more tax efficient. But again, it's this additional cost and stamp duty as well. Now, because you're buying it as a limited company, as not as a private person, you are going to be paying that additional stamp duty, and that is just another tax that you've got to pay. Yes, it'll be another source of income for the government, but it's what's going to happen to the housing market, to that stock of people who they can't get a mortgage because they don't have the deposit, and the banks won't take their rental payments of £900 and £800 a month as proof that they could afford a £600 to £700 a month mortgage. It's just going to leave these people out on, in worst case, not out on the streets, because there's not the social housing stock there for people to go into, because rightly or wrongly, the government sold off a lot of the social housing on the cheap, on the market and stuff like that. And again, you squeeze the landlords, they will, yes, they'll put the properties up for sale and they'll get them on the market. But then what's happening to those tenants? You've got to find another person or another company that will turn around and say, right, we'll buy that with tenant in situ, which again is quite rare to find, because they don't know the history of that tenant, they don't know the payment history, they don't, it's all that sort of worry and concern. And I don't know, it's one of these, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes in a year's time, 2 years' time. I know there is a push to try and get more houses onto the housing market, but by doing it this way, I don't think it's going to be the right measure. I think it's going to cause a lot more problems. I think at this, certainly don't quote me if I'm wrong, I think we could end up pushing, the housing market the cost of houses will probably rise because of this, and then all of a sudden we might even actually get a market crash or a dip, probably not as far as a crash, because there will be a lot of housing stock on the market with this additional rate stamp duty. It's going to put people off buying those bigger properties, so therefore buying the more expensive properties. So therefore they'll wait until that property drops down in value to then, I can get it just on the next band of stamp duty and stuff like that. I don't think it's a particularly good measure, but it's certainly not a great idea for long-term investment either, as well, because of this. So it's one of those ones where we have to wait and see what happens, I think.
For me, Dave, that's probably the big bits of the budget from my side of the table. I don't know if there's anything else that you've got on your list.
Yeah, there's a couple of sneaky ones I've spotted, because obviously I've got a copy of the budget, and this was my evening last night reading through this. Double cab pickups, I thought was quite a nice one that they've managed to squirrel away in the background of this. So a few months back we had the issue where double cab pickups were, I think it was in July time, where they were classed as a car and not as a commercial vehicle. And then obviously it went to the Court of Appeal, and it ruled
Returned very quickly.
Yeah, flipped around, and now from the 1st of April 2025 for corporations and 6th of April 2025 for non-incorporated businesses, they will be classed as a car for benefit in kind purposes and for corporation tax and for general tax purposes.
I've not seen that either.
So yeah, it's quite a sneaky one to sort of slip through. If anyone really does want to read the budget, it's item 5.91, treatment of double cab pickup vehicles. So yeah, it's yeah.
I think there'll be a rush to HMRC's website to find that item.
Yeah, sort of see what's happening on that. But yeah, it's going to be quite an interesting one that's going to affect quite a lot of guys that use, well, a few of our clients that use double cab pickups as well in their business. Again, because not only do you need to ferry stuff to and from site, but also you need to ferry workers to and from site. You can't technically do that in a standard transit van. So yeah, double cab pickups were pretty much perfect for that. So I think that's, again, a lot of the farming community were hit by that, and I think there will be again come April time when that comes through. So yeah, I think that's obviously sort of the main points we've covered on the budget. Again, we've got the increase in national living wage or minimum wage. I feel a bit loath to call it living wage because it's technically not, is it really? It's the minimum wage when it was originally brought out. So yes, it's nice to see a 6 or 7% increase for the 21s and over. But again, you've got to find, those companies have got to find that money to cover that. And again, they've then also got to find the money to cover the additional employers and I that they're going to have to pay on that. One interesting one, I noticed that the 18 to 20 year olds are going up £1.40 an hour, which is quite a jump, really.
Yeah.
And I know they're trying to bring in an alignment with adult and junior sort of salaries. And again, this is obviously another step towards that, where it's only sort of £2.21 an hour difference now, or come April, between the 18 and 21s and the 21s and over. But even down to the 16 to 18 year olds, where it's £7.55 an hour they're going up to. So I'm going to have to start paying my eldest a bit more. I think it's going to be quite depressing. I'm trying to get my money's worth out of him.
That'll fire him.
That'll fire him.
Might upset the dinner table.
It might be quite an interesting chat around the dinner table when that happens. So, but yeah, I'll be making sure he's certainly stocked up with work for his extra sort of 90 pence an hour for that. So. Any other sort of areas you want to cover? Or?
No, I think that's everything for me, Dave. Just thank you for having me on again, and it's always nice to get an opportunity to speak to you after the budget.
I know, even though it can seems a bit doom and gloom at times, but we try and look at the bright side of things as much as possible. It could have been a lot worse than it has been. It's not ideal, but we stiff up a lip and we'll just keep going on, don't we, really? So
as long as clients leave from these sessions down a little bit more, I think we've achieved I think
we've tried to, got our goal out there, sort of thing. So but yeah, likewise, I mean, if there are any other parts of the budget that we've not covered, or you really want to have a chat or really sort of see how it affects you personally, by all means give us a shout. Myself and Sam as well, we're more than happy to chat to people. Hence why we do what we do, sort of thing. Because again, we got into this to help people understand tax, to help people understand their finances and how to sort of really look after themselves and the guys that work for them as well. So yeah, thank you again for your time.
No, happy to. Thank you.
So thank you.